The Old Testament is not a series of disconnected stories. It is a singular narrative where every story and character points beyond itself to one who is greater. Jesus, the true and better prophet, priest, and king. Today we are looking at how Jesus is the true and better Ruth from Ruth 4:14. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel."
So as Greg shared last week, these topics are kind of advanced, picked, chosen, different speakers, and just as apropos last week as Greg is talking about Moses and Joshua, the true and better Joshua that Jesus is, it is just really feels right on track that we're talking about Jesus as the true and better Kinsman Redeemer from the story of the book of Ruth. Personally, it's very engaging for me. You're gonna feel that and hear that this morning. Second of all, it just seems appropriate for the morning. It's about, the whole story begins with two people who feel forsaken, lost, alone, just left behind. And you're gonna feel that way this week when you look at Facebook and you see all your friends at 30A and all over the country and all over the beach and everywhere. So it might even be helpful for you in that, all right? But there's just some things you're gonna need to know about the book of Ruth before we dive in. Some points of reference. First of all, you gotta understand what a Moabite is and why that really matters. The Moabites are the descendants of Moab, who was the son of Lot. And they and the Ammonites, the descendant of Ammon, are the most despised abomination of all things to the people of Israel because they are to God kind of the epitome of the worst of the worst of the worst of evil and false gods and idols and destruction and desolation. And so when we think about the Moabites and their god, Chemosh, we're talking about the worst of the worst. In fact, in 1 Kings 11, we hear of Solomon beginning to, first of all, drift away from God. We find that he married 700 wives. When Solomon asked for wisdom, he should have been maybe a little more specific, like, can you help me figure this out? Because that kind of wound up not so well. So Solomon starts drifting, and then he goes off the cliff. And here's how it's described as kind of him going off the cliff. Then Solomon, this is how bad it got. He built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, it's their false gods, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. So when we hear of someone who's a Moabite, they are from the worst of the worst abomination, desolation to the Lord. We also need to understand what a kinsman redeemer is. You've already heard that phrase. You're going to hear it substantially through the story because it's what the story is trying to tell us about Jesus. It's about a kinsman redeemer, but it will give us a foreshadowing like these true and better images and persons of something to know about our Savior. And the kinsman redeemer shows up in Deuteronomy 25, where God is trying to, one of the ways he makes provision for people in the Old Testament is he sets up certain societal ways of relating and taking care of things when there's need, because the poor, the powerless, the widow, the child are so vulnerable, not like not working out, like vulnerable in every way, that he sets up a community of his people to take that into consideration. So here's what a kinsman redeemer is, all right? An Israelite man dies. He leaves behind a widow. He does not leave behind a son. So that's the end of his lineage, with the lineage being so important culturally. Therefore, the brother of the deceased, the next in line, and all the way down the line until you get this taken care of, must take the widow as wife, must redeem the land, purchase the land that belonged to the family, and must endeavor to provide a son. So in the providing of the son, the lineage is assured. So that's what a kinsman redeemer is. That's what we're going to run into in the book of Ruth. And thirdly, just to understand how much the scripture is wanting to say something to you, Ruth is described in one place as the most beautiful short story ever written. It's a profound story of life and love and hope and redemption in such a powerful way. And if you think of it in literature, it's juxtaposed against Judges. Like it's right next to it in the book, and the book of Ruth takes place in the time of the Judges. So I found this, I love this, I thought online it'd give us just a real quick cliff notes on this. The book of Judges is all about spiritual darkness. The book of Ruth is all about spiritual light. The book of Judges is about pursuing idols who are no gods at all. The book of Ruth is about abandoning idols that are no gods at all and deciding for the one true God. The book of Judges is disloyalty all the way through. And the book of Ruth is about devotion. The book of Judges is disobedience bringing sorrow. And the book of Ruth is obedience bringing blessing. And then finally, the book of Judges, the chosen people of God are faithless. And the book of Ruth, a Gentile, alien Moabitess is faithful. And this is the story we walk into. Now, one more thing as background, and we're going to dive into it and go through the whole book of Ruth with selected verses. At the end of this, here's what I want us to really focus on. One gospel truth. Jesus is the true and better Kinsman Redeemer. What we're reading is a way for us to understand in some new ways the depth of what it means for Jesus to redeem our lives and who he is in his character. There's also a spiritual principle, and that is our Redeemer's story interprets our story. And we're going to see this kind of play its way out, but then at the end, I really want to camp on it. Because here's the thing, I can't experience teaching the gospel and the Word of God without experiencing living the gospel and the Word of God, and this really hits home for me. Because I've had a chance, as you might imagine, to reflect a lot on my life lately. Big transitions do that in our lives. I've thought a lot about parenting and marriage and work and all the things. And I thought a lot about when I first came to Knoxville and how angry and hurt I was at God, how disappointed I was in him, how I felt he stripped me down of so many things to move me out of Chicago to get me here. And I remember in that part of my story just thinking, I'm not sure how good you really are right now. You see, there's three things we need to know about God. He's God, he's good, and he's good toward me. And I started to wonder all three of those things. And lately, one of the things that God's been doing in my life is to allow me not to just be in the moment I am in, which I'm so thankful for, and I love this moment, but he's also been bringing me back and restoring and redeeming those moments and realizing that much of what I did in my late 30s and early 40s, which contributed to a lot of frustration in my life and a lot of disappointment with God and a lot of like, what in the world are you doing to me? Was actually rooted in me interpreting his story through my story instead of interpreting my story through the story of a Redeemer. And I invite you this morning to places where that might be true for you, where you might find the opportunity, as Ruth did, or Naomi does, or even Boaz, to find out, I don't even really know what story I'm in. I can't even tell how this all makes sense. I don't know where this is going. And that's to find by the end of the book of Ruth that all their lives, Naomi, Ruth, Boaz, all their lives were intentionally, specifically, attentively, purposefully designed to tell the story of the Redeemer, just like your life and my life. And when interpreted through that lens, it genuinely transforms how we see. And as Spencer, if you were here in the beginning when he read from Ephesians 1, we can see with the eyes of our heart what we cannot see with the eyes of our flesh. And that's the invitation in this passage. So let's dive into Ruth. Here we go. 15 minutes of the book of Ruth. I always check with the people that are what I call linear, because I'm not. Y'all may have noticed that, all right? I mean, he's really not linear. I'm a little bit more non-linear, and I checked with my linear friends. Did that make sense? And they said yes, so hopefully we'll do it again this service. All right, here we go. Ruth 1 through 3. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab. He's trying to find rainfall. He's trying to find crops. He's abandoned his people and his homeland to go to Moab. And he and his wife have two sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. So they go to Moab and they move there. They're in the abomination, the desolate spiritual land. And lo and behold, Elimelech dies. And lo and behold, both of his sons die. Now what we've got is Naomi, who's a widow in a strange, dangerous, uncertain, not good place land, with two Moabitess daughters, because both of the sons married, which they were not supposed to do. That was strictly forbidden. They intermarried into Moabite families. Now she's got two Moabite daughter-in-laws. So here's what happens in verse 6. Then she arose with her daughter-in-laws to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab the Lord had visited his people and given them food. She had been there, she's going to get food on the way out, but she's going back to Judah. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughter-in-laws, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughter-in-laws, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." And then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. Naomi said, "This is not going any good place at all. I release you from my journey, my misery, my destitution. You can't go back to Judah with me. It's not going to work. Stay here with your people." Is it the best theology we could hear? No. If you're Naomi and you're just kind of looking at trying to survive the story, you can kind of understand why she was doing this. It was a kindness she offered to her daughter-in-laws. It was the only way out she could see. But Ruth says, "No, actually, I'm just going to stay." One of the daughter-in-laws, Ruth, says, "I'm going to stay." And this is what happens in verse 15. And she said, Naomi said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." She's pleading with her. Just go. And again, theologically, not so good. Practically, you can make sense of it. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you." And then this passage that you've heard often, this is from Ruth. "For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." They are desperate, they are impoverished, they are rejected. Every level of this looks bad. And Ruth says, No, Naomi, there's just something here that I can't walk away from. So I'm going with you, I'm going to your land, and I'm going to follow your God. Just something I can't walk away. One of the things I love about Ruth that's going to show up over and over through the book of Ruth is, to me, she is the most aligned of all the women I find in Scripture. She is the most aligned to Mary, the mother of Jesus. She has a submissive, tender heart. She has a kindness and a gentleness. She's a very young woman who is in a place makes no sense, and she begins to understand what the favor of God means. So this is who Ruth is revealed to us. But they don't make mistake. They're in a really hard place. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" Because everybody knew the story. And Naomi went out with Elimelech. Things looked good. Like they were kind of a crew. They were going to be good. She comes back without anything. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town stirred. "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi." And now we start to catch a part of the story that's really significant. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Bitterness. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? He may be God. He might even be good. But he's decided not to be good to me. Because when I look at this story, that's all I can conclude. I would submit to you that all of us have been, maybe some are now, in a place where that happens. He may be God. He may be good. There's no way he's being good to me. Not with this situation in my family. Not with this health crisis. Not with this financial burden. Not with my work environment. Not with friends who I feel I've lost or been rejected by or betrayed by. It could not possibly be that God is being good to me, but watch how Naomi and then Ruth learn. There's a much bigger story that they're a part of. So they go to Bethlehem, and they're in Bethlehem. And what happens is they don't have any means of support. So God has also made another provision in the Old Testament called gleaning. You have a master of a field. You have a reaper, the reapers who come in and go through and get the grain. And then you have the gleaners. And here's what a gleaner does. A gleaner picks up the pieces that remain after the first reapers go through. It is a provision that God has made so that the poor and the powerless can find some food even without having land and wealth and anything to leverage. And Boaz, who owns the land, as we see, is very faithful to make that possible. And so Boaz returns from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." And then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" Now, you probably know the story. At some point, they're going to wind up together and married. I don't know at what point that becomes. I think I can pinpoint a time where he starts to really think about this as potential marriage. But his first recognition of her is, here's a young woman. I don't know who this is. And she obviously doesn't belong. Where does she come from and who is she? And so he finds out that she's a Moabitess, that she is Naomi's daughter-in-law. And then he says this, "Now listen, my daughter." Let me just take a moment for what he's saying when he says my daughter. He is giving honor and dignity to her that she does not in any way think she possesses. She's the alien from the abomination. And in what way could she ever imagine herself to be considered the lineage of the people of God? But he recognizes her that way. It's not so much he's saying, "I'm like a father to you." He's saying, "You belong in this lineage." Now, listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Do not act like just one of the gleaners. You are a part of our lineage. You belong. I am offering to you to be a part of my family and of the reapers and the resources I have. I am not treating you as one who does not belong. And Ruth knows this. And she feels it. And maybe, for the first time in her life, she received something that she could have never imagined. She fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner?" Here's a moment to just double click on. How is it that I do not belong, that I am an outcast, and you are allowing me to be a servant and a family member? How could that be? What would motivate such favor on me? Where does such kindness come to? I don't belong here. But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and your mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." You see, Boaz sees a whole much bigger story going on. He's talking about her coming under the wings of the Lord. He sees himself simply as a part of providing that for her. He is saying to her, "I see you, I see who you are, I see your heart, and you have come to a place, and I am a part of a place that is safe." And she said, "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants." Though I don't belong, though I should not be regarded, though I probably should not be allowed in the field to glean, you have brought me to yourself and your people and shared with me the goodness and kindness of God in you. So then he gives her a load of grain to go back and to see Naomi. And Naomi, seeing her come back, immediately recognizes, "Where in the world did you get that bounty? Where in the world did you get so much?" And here's what she says in verse 19. "And her mother-in-law said to her, 'Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you.' This could not have happened if someone had not intervened." There's no way Ruth is in this place apart from someone with power, with resources, with opportunity inviting her in. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I have worked today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." You have three characters that Boaz is honoring here besides the Lord. One, Elimelech, who's dead. And he is honoring the kinsman relationship. Ruth, who's clearly alive, and he's honoring that she is still alive. He's also honoring Naomi, who is alive and dead. Naomi's alive, but inside she is just she's empty. And she sees in this opportunity something she could not have imagined. Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours. He is one of our redeemers." He is one of our redeemers. That man and his kindness, his generosity, his resources, his wealth, his honoring, his inviting and calling us in. Ruth, this could be our hope. If this man were to pay the price for the land, if this man were to pay the price and invite you in, then we would be secure. We would be provided for. We would be protected. In the ways of a kinsman redeemer, the widow would go to the kinsman redeemer and ask him to marry her and purchase the land. The widow, not the kinsman redeemer did not approach the widow. The widow approached the kinsman redeemer. In this instance, Naomi is not going to approach Boaz. She's going to ask Ruth to. She's going to ask Ruth to, because of the potential of bearing a son and because of her sense of what it would mean for them to actually be received back by Boaz. And so she does that. And then when she tells her, "Now you go to him and you offer him." She says this. Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close my young men until they have finished all my harvest.' And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It is good, my daughter, that you go out with the young women, lest in another field you be assaulted.'" You get the level of insecurity that's here. Boaz is the security. So Naomi says to Ruth, "I want you to finest clothes, finest perfume, and I want you to offer who you are to our kinsman redeemer. And here's what I want you to do. When he goes and lays down tonight, I want you to lay at his feet. And then I want you to take his blanket, what he's covering, uncover his feet and lay it on you as a symbol of absolute vulnerability, complete trust in his character, his affection, and his role in our life as a kinsman redeemer. Do understand, folks, if this doesn't work, it is not good. And there is no hope, and there is nowhere to turn. And so Ruth is going to do just that. She's going to find her way to the feet of Boaz and invite and ask him to become her shelter, to become the wings of the Lord over her. Verse 7. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. And at midnight the man was startled, turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. The impropriety is, the shame of this could be, he cannot make sense of what's happening to him. "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And everything's going to come down to this. Will he redeem her? Will the alien Moabitess be redeemed? Will he buy the land? Will he pay the price? Will he take her in? Does she have hope? Or will she return empty with no hope? And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." again, affirming her and validating her character. You could have, and she apparently seems to draw a lot of attention to herself because of being the young woman no one knows in the field and being seen by people who are not good as very vulnerable. He said, there's so many ways you could have played this. And you could have gone after a good man, a bad man, a poor man, a young man, but you've come in the ways of the Lord to seek a kinsman redeemer. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. Don't miss this point. People already respect and regard her for who she is, even though she's a Moabitess. They know you're a worthy woman, and now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight and in the morning, and if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. And he makes it possible for Naomi for Ruth to kind of ease her way out and not be seen. So there's no shame, there's no impropriety. He did nothing to take advantage of her. He did nothing but provide shelter and goodness for her. And somewhere in this moment, he begins his heart to turn towards her with the affection of taking her as his wife. Of not just being the redeemer in policy and legal, but genuinely calling her to himself, because he doesn't say to her, hey, go to the guy and the kinsman redeemer near, the one who's more close and relative. He didn't say, go to that person and ask him, which would have been more the propriety. He goes, I will go. I think there's a couple of things going on here. I think that there's a lot of integrity in Boaz, but I think there's also strategy. I think he really wants to marry Ruth. I think he's and you're going to hear that in his affection. I think that he is ready to be towards her, not just a redeemer in name, but affectionate, attentive, pursuing, protective, providing, respecting, and seeing her not as a Moabite, but as his wife. And now we get to the close of the story. Then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of all my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one beside you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Now, at this point, Boaz's kind of strategy didn't actually work. He actually, I think this is clear in the text, he intends to be the redeemer, but he's also offering up the possibility that he's not. And so when the guy says, well, I'll do it, he says, well, hold on. The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. If you buy the land, you take on the woman. Understand, in this culture, if the kinsman redeemer dies, then the woman carries on the lineage and all of his inheritance goes through her. He would have to entrust all of his inheritance to a Moabite woman who, although she's worthy and although she's somebody that appears to be people respect and value, he's just not willing to risk everything for her. So Boaz has a moment where he's risking possibly, by doing the integrous thing, that he loses, but he's also trusting God with this. He's trusting God in this story, and he wants to step into this. It's going to be a very awkward moment for him, but here's what happens. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. And here's what he's basically saying. I can't take the risk of this. You have to do this, Boaz. This belongs to you. And Boaz has acted with integrity. And then he has received from the Lord what the Lord has for him. In verse 9, then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day I brought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I brought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are my witnesses this day. Then all the people who are at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthy in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. May this be the story of God among his people. Do not miss Rachel and Leah's story with Jacob, or miss Judah and Tamar's story with Perez. This is a hot mess. These people's lives are not antiseptic. They're not clean. They're not polished, and they're very messy, and they're very difficult. And they're saying, but may this Moabitess and you be part of the lineage of what God does among his people. And Boaz marries Ruth. And here's where the story concludes, and we walk back into our story. The women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has left you this day, not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. Naomi, you were bitter, and now you are blessed. Ruth, you were an outcast. You were then a servant, then a family, and now you're the bride." And at no point do they see any of this story happening. And Naomi becomes a grandmother to Ruth's child through her relationship with Boaz. And this is what happens in verse 16 and 17. Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So many things happened in that quick 15-minute story I just told you, among which are that the Moabitess woman becomes the woman who carries the lineage of Jesus and will become the grandmother of David, where the city of Bethlehem will be the place where we can find our Kinsman Redeemer. Will be the place where the lineage of God's people, his redeemed people, will be made secure. Will be the way in which he provides and protects for the vulnerable through his riches of grace and redemption. Will be the way the poor and the powerless become the messengers of his grace, his compassion, his kindness, his rich provision, and sacrificial protection. Naomi is brought back to life because in his goodness he did not forget his people. Ruth finds life because in his goodness he chooses to make a people who are not his people to become his people. The kinsman redeemer sent by God, full of riches and mercy and grace, sees the heart and calls the poor and powerless unto himself, from outcast to servant to bride to life that's hidden in Christ, your kinsman redeemer. And you can't possibly know, in the desolation of Moab, in the gleaning in Bethlehem, that there's a story that you're a part of that is so much more than you. Here's your spiritual truth of the gospel. Jesus is the true and better kinsman redeemer. Here's the spiritual principle. Our Redeemer's story must interpret our story. So if you have places that you have forgotten that this is true and that he is good, or you feel forsaken, your Redeemer wants to tell you who you are, to give you identity and dignity and life and draw him to yourself. If you feel forsaken, abandoned, he's God, he's good, but like many people I prayed with after first service, it doesn't feel like he's good right now. Places you can't make meaning. I can't put these together. Maybe you're where I was 1998, 1999. I cannot make sense of what I thought I had a pretty good script written for my life. God says, but that's not the story. And I am so thankful this part of my life to know. It's my Redeemer's story that makes sense out of my story when it makes no sense to me. Maybe places where you need to level up your hope. You need to have it raised or restored because it's just not there. You look at all the details and there's just not enough to piece together hope. and to be reminded of the Redeemer's story and his pursuit of you. Maybe you're like Boaz. You're being asked to do something that requires a lot of integrity, but you don't even know what the outcome's going to be. And it's not comfortable, and you don't want to do it, but you know he's called you to do that. I told him first service, when I was in college, I had this one young woman that I thought I was in love with, thought I was going to marry, was very set on marrying her. And then after we broke up 2 times, that didn't work so much, so I sent a letter just saying, I think we're over this. We're good. Blessings. I care about you as a person, but this isn't going to work. And so she went away that summer, and she actually found a new guy, and the guy transferred to college to be with her. And then they were struggling in their relationship, so he called me and he said, hey, would you come over in the dorm, maybe help me figure out how to work this relationship out? And my first thought was, no. No, I've ended it with her. That relationship has sailed. Why would I do that? But I thought, you know what? Be a person of integrity. So I went, because I do know her really well. So I went and I came to his dorm room, and there he sat in his chair, and behind him was an 8x10 picture of her. I'm a little triggered at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like, this hadn't worked out well, and why am I talking to you to help you work this out? Like, right now, I don't want to be doing this, right? And I remember that. I can remember what he was wearing. I remember the picture. It was just so frustrating to me. And I thought of 3 things I could tell him that would blow that relationship apart. And I'm like, I probably shouldn't do that. So I just, okay, well, here's who she is. Here's what she does. This is how she feels loved. If you want to, and he came to college to get engaged and marry. They broke up right after that, and still think I did the right thing, and I actually think I did a good thing. He turned out he's a great guy. He's a pastor, I think, somewhere in Texas or somewhere. Good guy, if he's listening. You're a good man. But I got the girl. I married her. "40 years later, there is no more intimate part of my redemption story than her. And when I'm sitting in that room, looking at that picture, talking to that guy, who's a good guy, I can't possibly see that. And when my family and I moved here 28 years ago, frustrated that my career I'd worked so hard for wasn't working, a career that required a PhD, I had 7 years to do my PhD. I had 7 years to get my PhD. I got it done in 6 years, 364 days, 23 hours, and 50 minutes. I literally rushed in through Chicago traffic to the campus, ran into the library, and handed my dissertation with 10 minutes to spare on my entire 7 years. That's how much I worked for it. And within 2 years, I was in a job in Knoxville that made no sense, and I didn't need any of that. But my bride, Teresa, is the most intimate part of my spiritual journey. And the next most powerful part of my journey has been being a part of the bride of Christ at Fellowship Church. I was so angry at him for not following my script. And he's like, oh, Rick, this is a redemption story, buddy. So I can say to you, wherever you are and whatever you're in right now, let the Redeemer's story interpret your story. It's hard, it's not easy. It takes a lot of surrender. It takes a lot of asking him to shelter you under his wings. It takes a huge risk of vulnerability, but let him be the interpreter of your story. I'm gonna ask Spencer to come out, and we're just gonna sit for a moment with this and pray, and then let you, wherever you need to speak to your Redeemer, or whatever you need to ask him. But let me tell you this last thing. Someone asked me recently, they said, you must be, after 21 years, very thankful for all that God has done at Fellowship Church, all that you've been able to be a part of. And I said, well, of course, yes, I am. I'm deeply thankful. I love the church that I get to hand off to RD in the next season and the elders. And I also love that I get to be a part of it in some way, even if that means I'm not on staff. I just get to be a part of this story. I'm so thankful. It's not what I'm most thankful for. I love you. I'm just telling you, it's not what I'm most thankful for. You know what I'm most thankful for? It's with you over these years I've learned the redemption story. Because along with my wife, I've been the most vulnerable, struggled the most, had the hardest time, been exposed for who I am the most, and needed Jesus the most. And he is a faithful Redeemer. And I am most thankful in my 21 years here that I'm not the same person I was then when I came. So I'm just going to ask us just to sit a moment, and then Spencer's going to lead us in a song. I know some people in this room, I know your story, and I know you got stuff right now that you're like, I don't even, this makes no sense. And I don't even want to act with integrity because I don't feel like it makes any difference to act with integrity. And I'll acknowledge you as God, and I'm sure you're good to the person sitting next to me or the person in the next row whose life's working the way I want it to, or the person who's sitting at 30A on the beach this Sunday. But I don't see it, your goodness turned toward me. And I invite you to believe and to know, as Spencer prayed in the beginning, with eyes that cannot see, that our human eyes cannot see in the flesh the Redeemer story. Ask him to give you spiritual eyes to see the Redeemer story. Ask that he might move you away from primarily relying on what you feel to primarily relying on what is real and what is true and who he is and his pursuit of you in all the places, particularly where you feel the most impoverished and the most powerless. And believe in that redemption, and believe that even churches are redeemed, that God works redemption in the churches. If you've been here all the years with me, you know from the time I started and how hard that transition was to this transition, the redemptive story. It's a redemption story. There's a Redeemer. Offer yourself to him and invite him to reinterpret the story you're telling yourself about your life.